Well, the Texas gubernatorial election is heating up, and we have some brand new polling that shows Republican Governor Greg Abbott with 50% of the vote, an 8-point lead over Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke's 42%. This is according to a survey conducted by Emerson College and The Hill. Regardless of which candidate they support, 63% of the respondents expect that Abbott will easily win the election, as do I. Just yesterday, Texans for Abbott released this campaign ad doubling down on Abbott's pledge to keep Texas safe.
There's a clear and present danger in neighborhoods like this. It's deadly fentanyl, and it's killing our kids. How's it getting here? Right here, through our border.
This year alone, law enforcement has seized enough fentanyl in Texas to kill millions. But Beto O'Rourke supports open borders. He says there isn't a problem at our border. Not a problem? Drug cartels, human traffickers, the most dangerous border in the world. Beto O'Rourke, too radical, too dangerous for Texas.
This comes after Abbott's recent executive order that designates cartels as terrorist organizations. Texas correspondent for USA Today Network in Austin, John Moritz, joins us now to discuss the race. Welcome to the show, John.
Glad to be here.
Help us understand a little bit what's happening here, because, you know, the beginning of the story with Beto O'Rourke many years ago was that he was a kind of a phenom that had an unprecedented ability potentially to capture a state that has historically not been kind to Democratic candidates. You know, do you think that something has changed between then and now in terms of this narrative, or that the narrative was just not based in reality to begin with?
Well, Beto is very much now a known commodity in Texas, and that means the people who know him and like him more. Conversely, the people who know him and do not like him are starting to basically cement that feeling in. 4 years ago, when he ran against Ted Cruz was a very polarizing figure in Texas and around the nation, and that got Beto O'Rourke a lot of attention and a lot of money. Governor Abbott is not quite so polarizing, so there's a little bit different dynamic in this race compared to when Beto first vaulted onto the scene.
That's very interesting, because obviously Governor Abbott is raising his kind of national profile with the movements of migrants to other states, weighing in on immigration issues, that kind of thing, in a way that is probably very pleasing to many conservatives. But could in theory at least, make him a more polarizing figure among people who are not inside the very solid Republican base. But I understand. But Texas obviously is a right-leaning state, so maybe still that's to his benefit.
Yeah, the polling that I've seen shows that even among Democrats, there's a slight support for the governor's policies, and among Republicans, there's overwhelming support for the governor's policies on the Texas border.
Well, speaking of those poll numbers, we want to zero in on some interesting findings from this poll. While Abbott's tough on immigration and cartel policies seem to have garnered him a slight majority of the Latino vote, with a 46% lead compared to O'Rourke's 42%. Black voters back Beto 78% to Abbott's 12%. Meanwhile, 60% of white voters in the state prefer Abbott, while just 35% support O'Rourke. What do you make of the difference between Latinos and Black Americans with respect to their how their preference for O'Rourke? Is it about different attitudes toward crime and immigration? And do you have any insight into what's behind some of those numbers?
Well, basically, the Latino vote in Texas is not monolithic. On the border, where a lot of attention is being paid, the Latino population averages a little bit more conservative and a little bit more conscious of the issues down there. In more urban areas like Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, the Latino vote tends to be far more progressive than it does on the border. But those numbers are probably quite pleasing to the governor and troublesome to the O'Rourke campaign. The governor's campaign has made no secret of the fact that it wants to win the Latino vote this cycle.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We talk a lot on the show. We've had several guests, some who are Latino Republicans, trying to diagnose or explain this phenomenon. Do you think it was maybe? I think part of the issue. So I'm curious for your take. Was just maybe an overconfidence on the part of Democrats for a long time that the Latino vote would be monolithic and would be theirs, and they wouldn't have to do much more than that, but just expect demographics over time to provide that bump. If anything, we're seeing some demographic support, affluent white support, very well-educated white support, really concentrating itself over time in the Democratic Party, and then having other groups much more up for grabs, or not belonging to one party or the other.
Yeah, it's almost war of attrition. 10, 15 years ago, those suburban voters were overwhelmingly Republicans. The Latino voters were overwhelmingly Democrat. Now we're seeing Democrats making inroads amongst suburbans, among Anglo-suburbans. But that grip on the Latino vote appears to be slipping. And another interesting phenomenon is, especially down in the Valley County, the Valley being the Rio Grande Valley, because it was so Democrat for so long, the races were all decided in the primaries in March, and the general election was kind of an afterthought. This time we have several congressional races that are competitive in the Valley, and also some state house races that are competitive in the Valley. So it'll be interesting to see if we see November turnout move up down in South Texas, where it traditionally has lagged, and that basically hurt the Democrats when they could count on Latino support, urban and rural.
Yeah, I think that's an important insight you mentioned just there about how, despite obviously being behind, Beto O'Rourke in some ways is doing better with white voters than Democrats historically have done in the South. I remember an analysis back in 2018 that pointed out that if Mississippi, which is the least white state in the union, if a Democrat in that state were able to get just 15% of the vote, they could win. And it's a struggle in a state like Mississippi to get 15% of the white vote for a Democrat. Obviously, Beto O'Rourke has well eclipsed that. So it's interesting to kind of note that there is some kind of shift or progress, if you were, for Democrats happening there. And on the flip side, that Abbott is even able to get 12% of the black vote or so represents a shift in the other direction, whereas typically you would expect to see 90+% of black voters rather voting for Democrats. It's interesting to watch those transitions happening in real time. But I want to ask you this. We did watch a clip of an Abbott ad that obviously emphasized crime and border crime specifically. What kinds of advertisements is Beto putting out? What are Texas voters looking at on their TV that's a rebuttal, if at all, to this?
O'Rourke is not quite as active, at least not yet, on television as the Abbott campaign is. His focus with his first two ads leaned heavily into the Dobbs decision, the one that basically overturned Roe v. Wade and abortion rights. That's one of the avenues that the Democrats think they can basically tap into, perhaps a subterranean voter bloc. Maybe voters who hadn't voted before, or maybe voters who might have been in favor of abortion rights, but that particular issue was not a deal breaker for them. So they went ahead and voted the Republicans because the other issues were more important to them. So we will see whether the Dobbs decision actually does turn into some actual support for O'Rourke and the rest of the Democrats, either statewide or even in swing districts.
Beto O'Rourke developed such a national profile, or sought a national profile, was given it, with very favorable media coverage when he ran against Cruz, and then, kind of decided he would go right to the presidential race, right? Trying that out for a brief time. So he does have this national profile. I wondered if you think that could possibly be hurting him, kind of going back to what you said in your opening remarks, that now everybody knows him and has kind of solidified more an opinion of him. But I wonder if it, I think maybe there's a parallel to a Stacey Abrams type figure. There's someone who overperforms some expectation or does well for themselves even though they don't win, and then just gets put on such a pedestal by the national party, the national media, in a way that's actually kind of deferential to their own sense of where they fit into the state's politics.
Yeah, the presidential campaign put a lot of attention on O'Rourke, as it does to anybody who runs for president. And basically everything he said was captured on camera, captured on video, and sound recording. So therefore, those positions that he took, trying to win the Democratic nomination, which basically you have to, lilt to the left if you're going to win nationally. A Democratic presidential nomination, and some of those comments, whether it be on the debate stage or in town hall meetings, responding to reporters' questions, voters' questions, basically staked him out as a left of center candidate. The Abbott campaign is exploiting those remarks quite effectively so far, even if they've got to kind of fudge the edges a little bit to make him sound worse or perhaps more liberal than he might otherwise be. But that presidential exposure kind of cuts both ways. It opens up an opportunity to raise a fair amount of money nationwide, but it also it kind of exposes some vulnerabilities among right of center, even moderate right of center voters here in Texas.
Yeah, Rob, I think that's a really good point to compare him to Stacey Abrams, because like Stacey Abrams, I remember some of those early comments, being taken as reflective of his ability to reach actually across the aisle and to thread a really delicate needle on some of these hot button social issues. He went viral for talking to a conservative at one of these town halls and answering their questions, a question I think about Colin Kaepernick, in a way that resonated with people and wasn't off-putting to a lot of conservatives, and helped them to understand how the left saw the issue. And it does feel like being kind of pushed forward by the Democratic Party in the way that Abrams has took him away from his roots, where he really recognized that he had to figure out how to communicate with everybody in his state, and perhaps has put him in the situation where the numbers, at least the polls at least, absent one of these Dobbs-based swings, doesn't look advantageous for him. But we appreciate you joining us here today, John, to shed some light on what's going on in the Lone Star State.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
And we'll have more Rising for you right after this.